Chapter 18. Betrayed. When Blackbeak didn't turn up, Krista said she was going to fly to Magi Lune's because she knew Maggie was waiting for the crystals she collected.
Wait here. I'll be back as soon as I can find her.
Zack said he'd wait for Blackbeak. He was only too happy to stay and dry off in the sun. But after a while, it was too hot, and he climbed onto the bank of the creek and lay beneath a shady tree. As soon as he lay down, he felt sick. At first it was a dizziness, but when he leaned back against the tree, he felt a sharp pain. He looked at the tree more closely and saw that it was dying before his eyes. And strangely, he felt as though a part of him was dying too. He jumped back into the creek, but when he looked down at his feet, he saw he was standing in a pool of oil. A steady rivulet of dark oil was trickling over the falls and collecting into the crystal clear pools below. While he stared at the waterfall, Krista's platypus friend clambered up the bank with her family. They too were covered in oil. Zack ran along the bank of the creek, calling out to Krista. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he had to do something to warn her about this danger. Krista! As she flew through the forest, Krista did hear his warning. It sent a violent shiver right through her. She stopped flying, her body alert and tense with fear.
The sickness! Oh no! I hope I haven't caught it,
she thought, dropping down into Sleepy Hollow to rest for a moment. It was just as well she did drop into Sleepy Hollow, because Little Hoop was in trouble too. The pine tree had completely changed shape. It was no longer tall, but very short, more like a squashed bush than a tree, its needles hanging in limp clusters at the top of its strong, stubby branches. It looked so sad that Krista felt like crying. When she looked at Stoneface, he didn't look any happier. She touched Little Hoop's needles.
Little Hoop. I don't know what's happened, but if it's something I said, then I'm truly sorry. I don't care what you look like. I just want you to be happy.
She only wished there was something she could say to Stoneface that might make him feel better. She hated seeing her friends like this, and she knew she had to find Magi Lune fast. There were too many unexplained things happening in the forest. A deep, awful fear began to curl its cold fingers around her heart. She left Little Hoop and Stoneface and flew at top speed toward the Antarctic beech trees and Magi Lune. She didn't slow down until she saw Ock and Rock. She fluttered past the big birds and into Magi's house, but although the door was wide open, Magi wasn't there. She called Magi's name over and over again, but there was no reply. Then she noticed a vibrant green path twisting through the trees. She knew it had to be Magi's trail, so she followed it. Like the trees and flowers around her, she immediately felt better when she was close to Magi Lune. However, the further she flew, she noticed a marked contrast in the trees. In areas where Magi hadn't been, the foliage was dying. Leaves hung limply, as if in mourning for the dead plants, and flowers shriveled up around them. She saw a glimmer of sunshine ahead and knew Magi must be close by. Krista found Magi sitting on an outstretched branch of a fallen tree. She looked exhausted. Her energy field was reduced to a pale glow, and her petaled robes, usually so fresh and bright, were wilted and soiled.
Oh, Magi!
She cried, rushing towards her.
Maggie, what's wrong?
Magi didn't answer. She stared at the tree stump in front of her. It was absolutely flat, as if it had been cut through in one mighty blow. When Krista touched its smooth surface, she couldn't feel any life in it.
Maggie, can you heal it?
No,
A force outside of nature did this. I can't heal it, and I can't stop it,
said Maggie sadly.
But I know what did this,
said Krista, suddenly remembering what she'd seen in the silent forest.
Maggie, I know what caused this. It's a monster the humans fight. It's called a machine. Zack can stop it. He makes red marks that protect the trees.
She flew around the tree stump, then stopped and stared. There, quite clearly, were the remains of a red mark. When she looked at the other fallen trees, she saw that they were also marked. In that terrible moment, she realized that these red marks were the marks of death.
But Zack said...
Zack told me the trees were safe.
Deep in thought, Maggie still didn't reply, so Krista flew towards the canopy. As she spiraled upwards, she knew there was something dreadfully wrong. When Maggie didn't call her back, not even when she flew beyond the treetops and out into the open sky, she knew the trouble was serious. She hovered, waiting until her eyes adjusted to the glare, then forced herself to stare at the horror below. Instead of a dense forest, all that was left was a vast plain of tree stumps stretching to the horizon. The huge yellow monster she glimpsed in the silent forest growled up at her from the front line of devastation. Magi Lune silently floated up beside her, and they looked down at the scene together.
It's a monster,
Krista sobbed, pointing at the idling machine.
And more humans.
They watched two men walk towards the machine and climbed inside. The machine suddenly roared to life, belching a thick cloud of dark smoke as it lurched forward and sliced through a whole row of trees. Krista doubled up in pain as the trees fell.
Humans did it.
She sobbed.
Humans did it all.
Humans are killing our forest.
Yes, said Maggie. But more than humans. Their destructive ways have unleashed Hexxus. Krista looked up as a dark billowing cloud rolled towards them. From its depths, an evil face leered at them.
I'm back!
Hexxus.
It blew a gust of putrid air around them. Its fiery eyes glowed yellow with anger when it saw Magi Lune. Humans have unearthed our old enemy, and he's getting bigger every day, said Maggie, quickly dropping below the canopy. The humans don't even know what they've done. Hexxus has attached himself to their poisonous machine. I don't think they know he's here. They don't realize that Hexxus will kill them too. Magi Lune led Krista back into the forest. We must tell the elders at once, she said firmly. Zack was already waiting for Krista at Old High Rise. Blackbeak had picked him up as he was running along the creek. They'd both been shocked to see so many dead fish floating downstream. Zack was relieved when he saw Krista flying towards him. He knew only too well that his friends at the logging camp were responsible for the oil spill. He had to tell her the truth about what was happening at the edge of the forest. But when he called out to her, she just stared at him and flew straight past. A crowd had gathered around Old High Rise. Zack noticed the elfin elders huddled together, talking among themselves.
Something is killing our forest!
Shouted a voice from the crowd.
Everyone's getting sick,
Cried another.
What are we going to do?
Shouted others. Zack felt all eyes suddenly turn towards him. He ran to Krista, but she refused to look at him. When the elders saw Magi Lune, they made way for her. Can you help us? Said Gyps.
What is it that attacks our forest?
Asked Grandfather Ash. Pushing his way towards them, Zack answered for Magi Lune. Humans, he said. Humans are killing this forest! A shocked murmur rolled through the crowd, and the elfin elders stared at him.
I wish the human tales were true. They're not here to protect the forest. They're cutting down trees. They're destroying the forest. And I was helping them do it. Batty was right.
I was?
Looking at the puzzled, innocent faces staring at him, he felt a burning shame, but knew he had to continue.
They're coming this way. You can't stop them. You'll have to leave.
Leave FernGully? Echoed the crowd of elves and fairies.
Where would we go?
Whispered Granny Belladonna. There is another way, said Magi Lune, speaking for the first time.
Gather everyone in the circle.
She commanded. Then without another word, she floated up and over the crowd and disappeared through the trees. One by one, the fairies and elves followed her. Soon Zack was left alone with Pips and Batty. Before flying after the others, Pips glared at Zack and said, Ever since you arrived, there's been trouble. Go back to your own world, human. Go back before you kill us all. When Batty saw how genuinely upset Zack was, he felt sorry for him and offered him a lift to the beech tree forest.
No, Zack. Truth doesn't always win friends, but it certainly influences people. You're not half bad for a hominid.
Hang a fang, you can't stay here alone, even if you are a gloomin' human. But you'll have to walk some of the way. I won't be too popular with you on my back. Zack accepted Batty's unexpected offer of friendship, and they flapped behind the others in silence. Batty dropped Zack off short of Magi Lune's house. Animals and birds hopped and flew past him, but nobody spoke to him. He stopped to rest beneath a yellow carabine. But he didn't stay for long, for it was the same sort of tree he spent the night in with Krista, and the thought of how innocent and happy she'd been filled him with a terrible sadness. The golden light of the setting sun slanted through the mist-shrouded beech trees, and Zack slowly followed the birds and animals rushing past him. He heard a sound he hadn't heard before. While he listened to it, it grew louder and louder. At first he thought it was the wind blowing through the trees, but the air was still. Then, thousands of twinkling fairies flashed through the forest and gathered at a single point just ahead of him. They filled the trees with their bright, flickering light. Running towards the trees, Zack climbed up a mountainous beech tree root and peered into the fairies' circle of light. I'm sorry, guys. I'm gonna need a moment. I'll see you in the next chapter.